Okay, so good evening and welcome to Winter Grow. So we have a small in-person audience, but I've already checked online and we do have a large online audience. So we're so glad that you joined us online for Winter Grow. This is our first of 5 different speaking events that we have for our Winter Grow series every Wednesday at 4:45 until Ash Wednesday. And again, they're in person or online. So we encourage you to either come in person or to view online. In this case, most of you chose to watch online. It's a little bit chilly this evening. Welcome to those of you who did come in person. We're so happy that you're here with us. Tonight, we have the Reverend Ryan Frack with us. He is from the United Methodist Children's Home, and he is going to just talk to us a little bit about the history of the Children's Home, and tell us about the mission and vision of the Children's Home, what they do for young people today, and share with us some stories of the young people who are impacted by the Children's Home. So we're going to welcome Ryan on up to the stage, and he's going to share a little bit with us about the Children's Home, a very important ministry in the life of the United Methodist Church. So welcome, Ryan. We're so glad to have you. That's, if you're going to directly talk to the people online, that's the camera right there. And of course, you see the people who are in person.
Thank you, Pastor Christine. Hello, everybody. Hi. So this is a really cool opportunity to be here, and I was actually just here about a month ago on a Sunday morning. So if anybody wonders, this is deja vu. I know many of us are wondering that during the pandemic, but you are not seeing things. So it is a real great opportunity, and just what a great place to be. So Pastor Christine had asked that I share a little bit more about the Children's Home, as this is one of the ministries not only of the Florida Conference, but certainly a ministry that Lake Deaton has been supporting even before you were Lake Deaton. So this is a really big part of the culture of missions here. So I'll start the mission of the Florida United Methodist Children's Home. I love when I share with pastors and churches. It really is kind of a unifying experience, because I think for all of us within the churches, everybody seems to be able to get on board with the mission. And it is empowering children and families to experience the transforming love of Christ through holistic care. There was a young man who was with us. He's no longer in our care. He had been discharged. His name is Kenny. And I'll start by sharing with you about him. Kenny was a young man who was really likable, somebody who I really enjoyed getting to spend time with. He was funny. But Kenny had made pretty clear early on that he did not really want anything to do with faith. In fact, when he would go to chapel like the other kids did, Kenny was regularly, he went up to one of the chapel leaders, and he had said, "Do we really have to talk about that God stuff today?" To a chaplain, he asked. And for many of us, that's hard to imagine, especially, I imagine, for many folks here, in person, online. You have grown up in the church. Church and God have been your safe place. And yet, for folks like Kenny, God has not been a safe person in their lives. God has not been somebody who they have wanted to worship or revere. For many of them, they blame God for the things that they've gone through. And so all of a sudden, it makes it a little easier to understand why Kenny might struggle with talking about that God stuff. And the Children's Home has been around since 1908. So we've been around a minute, as the kids, I guess, would say. And yet, there have been kids throughout our history who, just like Kenny, have not only gone through great trauma, but they have blamed God for it. And so the Children's Home exists to serve children like Kenny, kids who have experienced a great deal of trauma. About 80% of our kids have been placed by the state, so that means the Department of Children and Families, or DCF, as you have probably heard it referred to, has gotten a call that there has been abuse or neglect or abandonment, some safety concern. And when that happens, the state gets involved. And so there are case managers, and there are judges, and there are certain legal things that need to be in place for the parents to get their children back. So that's about 80% of our children. And the other 20%, we call them private placements. And that just means they come to us any way other than the state. So pastors, family members, baseball coaches, anybody who has called and said, hey, there's a family going through a difficult time and they've got children that are just not in a great place. Would you be able to care for them? And so that ministry that we have at the Children's Home really has evolved over the years. So as I mentioned, we were founded in 1908, and I believe Lake Deaton and certainly New Covenant as well have, y'all are familiar with the Fifth Sunday offerings. That's our largest source of church funding. And every year, whenever there are Fifth Sundays, we do a Fifth Sunday offering, and that is a huge part of our mission. It's interesting from the history perspective, 2 years before we were founded in 1906, churches across the conference took up an offering on Fifth Sundays as a way to raise funds to build a campus. And so I share that to say that really is kind of woven into that relationship and connection between the Children's Home and the local church. Back then, we were the Methodist Orphanage because that was the state of child welfare back in 1908. And in fact, if you talk with other sister organizations or sister conferences that have children's homes, they were founded around the same time because that represented the large need that was there. And since then, we, along with those other organizations, have adapted because the needs have not gone away, they've just changed. And so, whereas we are not an orphanage anymore, we serve children who have experienced, as I said, abuse or neglect or abandonment, but also any number of traumatic issues from family substance use to substance use themselves, or they might be the victims of sexual abuse or trauma. Many of them, a term within the child welfare field, have experienced what's called adultification. So you may have children, young children, being elevated to adult roles at very young ages. So they may be taking on responsibilities like caring for young children because mom or dad might not be in the picture or might not be in a stable place to provide the care needed. So our children, even at very young ages, have experienced things that many of adults have never, should never have to go through, let alone children. And so the Children's Home exists to provide not only a safe place where that harm stops and they get therapy and they get the help they need, but it's also a place for transformation. Because in the midst of all of that, we believe that God, Scripture reminds us over and over again that God has promised that God will never leave us nor forsake us. And we know with our children, as I mentioned, just like Kenny, who have blamed God for the things they've experienced, we know that's not Wesleyan. And we share that God has not caused their harm. God has not done this to them. In fact, God weeps for them and weeps with them and grieves with them. And yet, we also know that God is using, can bring about good things in the midst of their struggles. And so for somebody like Kenny, in the midst of his struggles, he actually went on a mission trip, which I know many churches are rethinking mission trips right now in the time of COVID, but that's been a huge part of our ministry. And so they went down and did some mission work, and there was one evening in which one of the staff members had led a devotion on prayer. And he talked about prayer and ended the evening and left, and Kenny walked up with one of his friends, and he said, listen, you're talking about prayer, but I don't even know what that means. Can you teach me how to pray? And so the staff member did, and right there, Kenny and his friend and the staff member prayed. And you all can use your imagination as to how creative the prayers of middle school boys can be. But nonetheless, they were real, and they were honest, and they were authentic. And so as mission trips go, they finished up, and the kids went back to normal and went back to their everyday lives. And Kenny was actually checking in with our chaplain, just as the kids do routinely, to see how things are going, what's going on in his life. And it was a good conversation, and as Kenny got up to leave, he turned around and looked at our chaplain, and he said, you know I'm still praying, right? Not only am I praying for you and for your staff, and for your significant others, but I'm praying that God would continue to use this as a safe place for kids just like me. And for me, that stuff, I tell that story and it gives me chills because it's a reminder that I've heard an old saying, and it may be old hat for many folks, but it says, kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's where ministries just like the Children's Home, you all are empowering us to be that voice and that presence to children that shows them that God cares, most importantly. And we certainly care about and love them. And as a ministry of the Methodist Church, we really get to take this specific population that folks may or may not have interactions with, and we get to be a voice of transformation and hope. And so not only children like Kenny, there's a young man named Angel who was a resident up in our Madison campus in North Florida. And so as a 16-year-old, Angel had come to us because his mom was given the choice between either caring for him or choosing somebody else, and she chose to go with somebody else. And you can imagine all of the questions and the doubts and the self-worth issues that Angel was struggling with. And unfortunately, Angel's story is not unique in that many children are made to feel like they are not a priority and they are not important. And so not only does that affect their relationships and their self-esteem and their interactions, but when we talk about God who makes us and creates us and knits us together, as Scripture says, in our mother's womb, there are all types of reckonings that children have when it comes to self-worth, especially since they hear about a God who loves them, but see family members and close relationships that prove to them otherwise. And so in the midst of all of that, Angel had gotten involved in our campus up in Madison, and he actually was excelling in school, ended up bringing up his grade point average, was set to graduate early, ended up dual enrolling and even getting a job at a local grocery store chain through his connections with the Madison Youth Ranch. And so many folks ask us, and you may be wondering this yourself, how long are children in our care? As I mentioned, back when we were the orphanage, children would be with us from the time they came into our care until they, got a job, went to the military, got married, went into the workforce. But that has changed now. And what I tell folks is that on average, the children are with us only about 18 months to 2 years. And we actually think that's a good thing. It's not because we don't get attached to the kids, because we certainly do. It's not because they aren't being helped at the Children's Home, because they certainly are, but it's because study after study will show that in almost every situation, it's in the best interest of the children to be back in a traditional home setting. It really is an example of the connection and attachment that God has given us with loved ones, that many of our children, even the ones who have been hurt by their parents, when you ask them what they want to do, they will tell you almost to a child, I want to go home. I want to be with my mom or my dad or take care of my sister or brother. I want to spend time with them. And what a beautiful image, even in the midst of experiencing pain, that they love those in their lives. And now we understand that there are some safety concerns, and so we work with the parents. In fact, the situations in which we see the highest level of success as the children reintegrate back into home, those highest level of success happens when the parents are involved, when they're able to be. Some of our children have parents or other family members they are not legally able to be around. But for those that are, we work with the parents because what we find is that most parents did not set out to make poor choices and to harm their children. What we find is that for many of our parents, they lack resources, whether it's financial resources, and so they are stretching themselves thin working, and so prioritizing time with the children kind of fell down the list, or they lack community resources, so they don't have help around them, to take care of the kids or to aid them. Maybe it's a single mom or a single dad, and they don't have that community resource there. Or they might lack the educational resources. They might not have seen examples of what healthy and good parenting looks like. And so what we find is that by working with the parents, we're really just unlocking opportunities for them to be the parents they've always wanted to be with their children. There was actually a young lady who was with us. She's now graduated and gone back home with her mom, so spoiler alert. But when she came with us, she actually stayed with us on 2 occasions. The first, she was removed from her home by herself because her mom was involved and had some drug addiction issues. And so this young lady came into our care at, I believe, around age 10. She was with us for a couple of years and then went back home with mom. And unfortunately, just a couple of years later, she actually picked up the phone and called us, which really is an example of the trust we had been able to build with her. But she said, listen, things are not going well. It's not a safe place. You guys are kind of my last resort before I call DCF. And so are you able to care for me? So not only was she able to come into our care, her younger sister, who was 8, actually came to stay with us as well. And in the meantime, while she was in our care, this young lady had previously, her grade point average had dropped to below a 1.0. She was not doing well in school. Her relationships were kind of falling by the wayside. And yet, at the children's home, she had gotten involved in school, in our on-campus school called Legacy Scholars Academy. She was able to not only get the educational help she needed, but our school is kind of tailored to help meet some of the specialized needs that our kids have, giving them opportunities to name some of the experiences of trauma, how it's affecting their learning, if they need to take some time to collect their thoughts, if they need to kind of process some of the things that happen. Maybe parents have missed a home visit and it's really affecting their ability to study. They're able to verbalize that. And so this young lady had gotten her grade point average up to about a 3.95. She ended up graduating, got a job, and then went on to college. She also developed quite the skill as an artist, and so we saw her really thrive there. One of the coolest things about this young lady named Kelly, in fact, her younger sister, they were actually able to do some sleepovers within the cottages. So her cottage would let her younger sister come over and stay over with her. And Kelly had actually said that the children's home had given her the opportunity to do the sister things they hadn't been able to do before. And the exciting thing about Kelly's situation is that her mom was able to actually, she was able to get Kelly and her younger sister back. And so she was able to, she had gotten clean and gotten off of the drugs that she was on, and she was working with our staff. She was working with Kelly's therapist to do the things she was able to do, to be the parent she wants to be and knows that she is able to be. And their relationship has been thriving since. And these are just some of the many stories of the children that you all are impacting. And so I want to stop. Normally I take questions, and so I'm going to take some questions here if anybody has any. And if you all have any, you can check in with the pastors here, and I'd be happy to answer with them later. But any questions y'all have about the children's home, about who we are, what we serve, anything? Pastor Jim has a question.
So, I know most kids go home or return to a home situation within 2 years. Do you have kids that end up staying all the way through, their teens up to adulthood with the community?
So Pastor Jim's question was referencing something I had said earlier, that the kids on average are with us 18 months to 2 years, but he asked if we do have any kids that are with us for a longer period of time and end up kind of, graduating out into the community. We try really hard for that not to happen. I will tell you, and I think Pastor Jim knows this, this is my second time serving at the children's home. Right out of seminary, I got a job from 2010 to 13 working in the chapel. Then I was serving in the 2 local churches here in the North Central District from 13 till December of 2016. When I worked at the children's home before, from 10 to 13, there was a young man there who had been with us. It was a really tough situation, and he actually was with us for about 10 plus years. And it was just a tough home life situation, and he was never able to kind of move out of the children's home and go back home. And so there were kind of one-off situations like that. But for this young man, it was a really tough spot because many of his acting out behaviors came from the fact that he just wanted to go home. He wanted to be, quote-unquote, normal, even though we know normal doesn't exist. He wanted that experience that his friends were having, getting adopted or returning back to home. And so we have done a lot of educating, not only letting folks know the type of children we serve and the type of work that we do, but also letting the state agencies know that, we are really a temporary treatment facility, but ultimately you need to be working on the long-term plans, because whether a child is adopted or whether they age out at 18, there's going to be life after the children's home. And so letting them know that we really serve particular needs, and then once children have had those needs met, once they've graduated to certain levels, then there are other programs that can better meet their needs. So all that to say, and I don't know if this was your question, Pastor Jim, but, could we kind of hold a child there while their long-term stuff is being worked out? Certainly, but once it gets past a certain point, we've seen it to where it's had negative effects, and not only in our care, but in the system in general. Once a child has worked past the kind of the sweet spot of the program they're in, you can see that regression if they're not being challenged, if they're not kind of being pushed into other areas.
That's kind of where I was going with that. Was a concern for them is like if they stay longer because of their home situation, whatever, then what the children's home does is it help integrate them into some sort of family system.
Yeah.
And so that continues to go on.
Yeah, and we have, we have had folks who have had that happen, but we've really developed relationships with community agencies and with other folks, letting them know what we do and who we serve, and also figuring out who they serve so that we can kind of build those relationships and allow the children to kind of graduate into those other programs. We also have our independent living program once they age out at 18 to help them kind of get on their feet if they need transitional housing. Yes, ma'am. So her question, two questions, how do they get their education when they're with us? And about how many children do we serve? I'll answer the second first. So our census changes weekly, depending on the admissions and discharges we get, because we also have an emergency shelter where children could be with us for as short as maybe 24 hours to maybe 4 weeks or even more. So those numbers are kind of constantly changing, but on average, between our Enterprise campus and our Madison campus, on average, it's about 70, 75. That's about how many we can serve. We also provide services for foster families in 5 counties. We've got another emergency shelter in South Florida, but those are our residential numbers. Now, your question about education, that number has evolved over the years as well, just like our services have evolved. Historically, our children had gone to local public schools. I'm a product of public schools. I know many folks grew up in public schools. And one of the benefits of schooling off campus in general is that it gets you off campus. And you get to, as children in traditional settings, it's always good to have new adults in your life and to have a change in scenery. And so that was always a benefit. Unfortunately, for many of our children, they would kind of fall through the cracks, because I don't know if we have any educators here or administrators, but I will go ahead and say I think our teachers are overworked and underpaid, and especially the pandemic is revealing they're also expected to be IT professionals and to discipline via Zoom or GoToMeeting or whatever they're using. And so our teachers are already stretched to the max, and that's not throwing on top of it children who've experienced some really traumatic events like those that we've served. They're not able to get the attention from the teacher that they need. The teacher just doesn't have the bandwidth to do it. They don't have many of them are in there with classrooms bursting, and they don't have an assistant. And so we tried something, because of course we did have success stories, and we did have children graduate and do well in that. But in 2014, as the result of some conversations we've been having, we had a retired principal on our board at the time, and our education staff was working to see, is there anything we can do to better meet the needs of our kids educationally? Because for the most part, they were finishing fine, they were doing well, but overall they weren't excelling in the way that we knew they could, or in the ways we had seen them excel in other areas in their life. So we just wanted to try something. And so we created at the time, we're called a contract school, but we created a private school at the time called Legacy Scholars Academy, and it was just our attempt to see, can we make our own school here, same curriculum, we can even get Volusia County teachers and just pay them, but give them another model of care. There's a program out of Yale University called Ruler, and it is based on emotional intelligence. And so it's this idea that basically each person has within them the ability to solve whatever it is they're going through, but giving them a chance to kind of tap into what they're feeling. We're not just teaching them educational principles, we're also teaching them how to manage conflict and how to manage struggle. And so in the beginning, it was a 6th through 10th grade experiment. And it was so successful that after the first year, Volusia County came knocking on our door and said, we want to be a part of this. And so after that, we became a full-blown Volusia County school. And so now we are considered a contract school. We're not a charter school because we're not open to the public. We're also not an alternative school. And that's really important because alternative schools often are associated with discipline issues and sort of having problem kids kind of thing. And that's not what we are. We are, it's a school that serves children. Again, they're getting the same curricula that their peers are getting, but the teachers have small class sizes, and they're also given specialized training to meet the needs of our children. And so the kids have responded really well. So that's kind of how they get their education. Now, for some specialized needs, the school is able to serve a variety of educational needs, from those who need an IEP or an individual education plan all the way to those who want to dual enroll. We can do that. But there are some who have some extra needs. There's an emotional behavior disorder program that some of our kids have had emotional behavior disorder. And so for some of those specialized children, they still do go off campus or in normal times. Now they're doing it via Zoom. But that's how they've been getting their education. And in Madison, they go to the local public schools. You had a question, sir? So his question was, when the children turn 18, what happens? And again, that answer has evolved over the years. It used to be, because legally, children are considered adults at 18. You can argue developmentally that they don't become adults until about 25, but nonetheless, legally they're considered adults, so they cannot stay on campus at 18. It used to be a pretty traumatic event because you turn 18 and it's time to, my words, shove off, like it's time to head out. But we understand that there's a lot of planning that goes into that. So each child, when they're in our care, has their own treatment plan, and they are actually a part of that. It's not just a plan that is created for them by somebody else. They get to sit in on those meetings and be a part of that. One of the things we found is that for children who have experienced a loss of control, the best way to remedy that is give them some agency, and so getting them involved in that treatment plan. So that includes things like getting adopted or returning back home, or once they age out at 18. And so those conversations are happening long before that day. Now, many of our children, especially since we've had the on-campus school that serves middle and high school students, some kids, when they graduate, or when they age out at 18, they're still not finished with school. When I turned 18 in October, I was a senior in high school, and so I was still finishing high school. And so for some of our children, they know they want to finish high school with us, and so we actually have transitional housing available. It's right across the street in a cottage where it serves much more, it functions much more like a kind of a college dorm in the sense that they have an RA. They're given a little bit more autonomy. They also are expected to cook their own food. They buy their own food. There's a lot more life skills they're learning there as well. But our independent living program does a ton in terms of teaching them skills that we think they're going to need after they leave our care. Things like budgeting and cooking and healthy relationships and financial management. The kids hate the financial management, but it's important. So those are the things that we're doing to pre-teach, but also, especially in the age of being connected digitally and social media, we're able to keep better contact with the kids. And so we have folks that are kind of walking with the children, after they leave our care as well, because unfortunately, even though, we know that once they graduate our program, they've done well, and they're off to a bright future. For many kids, they're still kind of in need of kind of a step down beyond that. And so we still work with local agencies and other folks in terms of connecting them with employment. And throughout our independent living program, the kids have the opportunities to get jobs on campus when they're younger, and then at local fast food places, stores, other places of business in the area. So that's what happens when they're 18, but we also think it's really important that what happens once they turn 18 comes as a part of the conversation that was begun long before they were 18, if that answers your question. So, yes, Pastor Christine. Hey. Okay. So the annual operating budget. Okay, so you said the first question was answered. Yeah. Okay. 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 Yeah. So the annual operating budget. So there are, we have our Enterprise campus, and I don't know how many folks have been to Enterprise. There's about 12 cottages on campus, as well as some other buildings, educational building, gymnasium. We have a commissary, maintenance. That's a pretty large facility for 100 acres. Then in Madison, we have about 350 acres. There's only 2 cottages up there, a chapel and a counseling support services center, and then employment and some other things. I say that, and anybody who's worked with budgeting know I'm trying to paint a picture of the overall budget. But in general, I believe last year, I want to say it was 17 million, I believe, in terms of, a lot of that is overhead in terms of employment and operating budget as well. And how it is funded, we have multiple funding streams. And so there is funding from the state. So we do receive some funding for our state placements. They don't pay for the entirety of those children that are there. It's a certain amount per day for each of the children in our care. There is also grants is our second source of funding. Private donors as well. And in that, there's like wills, estates, things like that. So plan giving is something that we work with as well. And then church funding is a major part of our funding as well. We used to be funded entirely from churches. And again, as the needs evolved and as the children that we were serving changed, again, when we started taking state children, that changed the funding stream a little bit. So that's kind of the big part of the funding question as well. And I don't know if you're going to get more follow-up questions in general, but yeah, it's a large operation, and especially for any residential facility like that, we've got, for each cottage, for example, we've got 2 sets of house parents. One is on for 7 days, and then another's off for 7 days. So that's 4 per cottage, plus assistants that we have working there. We have our emergency shelter, which has 24-hour shift staff working. We have our folks that are working with our foster parents, and so it kind of runs the gamut. But that's the basic, quick and painless overview of our annual budget. I did what? So Pastor Jim's question was for the house parents. He said he didn't realize they shifted. You had one shift and then another shift. His question was, do they still stay on campus when they're off shift? What happens? So what happens is when they are on for our residential program. Now, emergency shelter is different because, again, we may get an emergency shelter call at 3 a.m, so somebody needs to be on and ready to go. But for our residential program, in our cottages, they will work for 7 days, and so they're on shift. And so when they're on shift, they're living there 24/7 while they're there. And then when they go off shift, they actually do leave the cottage. Now, Some of our house parents have their own homes in the area. Some of them, I've known folks in the past who have had houses in Jacksonville, so they would commute the 2 hours to get to Jacksonville on their week off. And there are other folks, they may have come from out of state, and so they don't have a residence in the area. And so we actually have some retreat-style housing in a kind of a secluded location off campus. It's far enough away from the kids to where there's a little bit of separation there. So on their off week, they're there. And so they can stay there at a discounted rate. But it really depends on the family if they have their own home. Some of them say, listen, I'm staying in my own home when I'm off. And so that happens. But when they're on shift, they're here 24/7. So. Mm-hmm.
So the school now with Volusia County joining them, how do they do that with the children's home? Does the children's home pay them then for that, or are the teachers' salaries, all that being paid by the county taxes, school board, all that?
Yeah.
Is there a cost to that?
Is there a what?
So is there a cost?
Is there a cost to it? So Pastor Jim's question was regarding the funding of our school. Since it's a Volusia County school, who pays for that, basically? So, yeah, it is treated like another school where the county actually pays the teachers' salaries. And so there may be some things, whenever, if we ever have an activity on campus and it's on, a federal teacher holiday, those teachers are on the Volusia County payroll. They're not there. So we're doing it with our staff on campus there. And so, yeah, so they are paying the teachers there, their salaries and benefits. And so we've been blessed that the teachers have been pretty consistent with us. We've really enjoyed working with them. They do a great job. A question I get a lot as well, I didn't get asked it tonight, but in case you're asking, I'll answer it for you anyways. Folks ask about, especially if the kids are at school on campus, what happens with things like sports or band or other opportunities for them to get involved. And historically, we have had children who have gotten involved in those things. In fact, we had a young man who I'm thinking of, I know there have been others, who actually got a football scholarship, and he was one of the local high school stars at Deltona High School when he was there. So we have a relationship with Deltona High School that if the children's grades are okay, and if their staff and all the folks that are part of their treatment plan say it's okay for them to do that, that they can be a part of sport. So it's almost kind of like a homeschool situation where you might be a part of a homeschool, but if you want to play sports, you can play with the local high school. Same thing with band, cheerleading, dance, any of those other opportunities as well, because that is building the whole person. And so we have some of those types of programs, music opportunities on campus, and so we see that's really valuable. And if they can connect with that with their peers in high school, we want them to be able to do that as well.
Here's the next question. So the Madison kids, do they go to public school then?
His question was about the Madison children. Madison has been around same amount of time as our on-campus schools. So they've been around since 2014. So we don't have an on-campus school up there. So they do go to local public schools. So. So her question, Pastor Christine's question was, I like how you prefaced it by saying if it wasn't COVID time. So in normal times, we absolutely want folks to come, not only to tour, but there are certainly opportunities to do some mission work, some volunteer work. And we want folks to be able to do that. And that is one of the best ways for people to get to see the ministry. We don't just want folks to support the children's home. I mean, certainly we want that. But we want you to know that this is a part of your ministry here. So we want you to be able to see it and touch it. So things like, we have a person who works directly with volunteers. And so let's say, for example, you have a group that wants to come volunteer. Either the pastors, or I know Paula is the children's home representative here. Let's say one of y'all may call and say, hey, we've got a group that wants to come and do some work. Who do we talk to about that? So I would contact my colleague Lynn, who then would be in touch with, she would find out from you what your group is interested in doing, what kind of work they want to do, if they have any skills or experiences that, if you've got folks that are skilled in a particular field, they might be able to be useful in a particular area. But then she'll check with our maintenance staff, with our other departments to see what needs are there, and then connect you with an opportunity to come. And so we love for that to happen. In fact, volunteering is a huge part of the ministry of the Children's Home, and I'm sure the same is true here at Lake Deaton, that we couldn't do the ministry we do without the work of the people. And so there are absolutely opportunities to do that, and we love for people to get to do that. And one of the things we've been doing, and I've been working particularly with pastors about, is to see not only how we can better serve the children we serve, but also seeing as how in local churches you all are serving children and families right in the community. If there are things we can do that can make that work better, we want to be able to do that. So if you'd ever like me to come and speak to your group, if there's ever anything that we could provide that would benefit the work y'all are doing, we want to be able to do that, because I think when the church gets better, we all get better. And we really, really are grateful not only for your support, Lake Deaton, but for all the wonderful work you're doing here, and for the opportunity to be kind of first off in these Wednesday Grow Nights here, so in post-COVID. So I guess if there are no more questions, thank you all so much for your time, and I guess at the rate we're going, I'll be back next month. So thank y'all again.
All right, well, I'm gonna remind you guys all that next Wednesday we're gonna do State of the Church, and you get Pastor Jim, Pastor Loida, and myself at 4:45, and we'll be in person and online again, and we'll have microphones on the floor for next week as well. And you can ask us any question you want to ask us at all. Right, we might not answer it though. So I'm going to pray, and then we'll all go on our way for Wednesday night. Gracious God, we just thank you so much for this day and for this opportunity for us to gather together, both online and in person. And we thank you for Ryan and his ministry and all of those who work at the Children's Home. And we ask a blessing on the young people there. We ask that you would continue to walk with all of them, and that we ask that you would give us a vision to continue to walk with the Children's Home. We ask this in your name. Amen. I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.